This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China reportedly orders an immediate ban on refined fuel exports in March, a preemptive move to safeguard domestic supplies amid fears of disruption from the US-Israeli war on Iran. Now, a massive release of emergency oil reserves fails to calm supply fears. Crude surges past $100 a barrel, sending stocks sharply lower. And the US launches sweeping trade probes into excess industrial capacity across more than a dozen trading partners, raising the specter of fresh tariffs. Beijing fires back, calling it political manipulation. And China's most important annual political meetings have wrapped up, setting out key priorities for the nation in a more turbulent world.
We're taking the conversation from the Great Hall of the People to our bureau here in Beijing as China wraps up its most important annual political meetings. Now, China has just approved a new economic and social roadmap for the next 5 years. What does all this mean for tech innovation and people's livelihoods? Our team will unpack it all right here, just ahead.
Merchant ships caught in the crossfire of the war in Iran as attacks on vessels in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz intensify. At least 16 ships have been struck in the region since the US and Israel launched the military offensive on Iran. Countries are now working on measures to weather potential impacts as the war chokes movement in the critical waterway. Well, reports suggest China, the world's biggest oil importer and a major fuel exporter, has ordered an immediate ban on refined fuel exports. The ban includes shipments of gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuel. Well, the halt will apply to cargoes that have yet to clear customs as of yesterday. Now, Japan will release 45 days' worth of state and privately held strategic oil reserves in light of expectations that crude oil imports will drop sharply by the end of the month. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi says that she will go ahead with the release ahead of waiting for formal approval from the International Energy Agency. Japan is dependent on the Middle East for up to 95% of its oil supplies. South Korea is planning to release more than 22 million barrels of oil as part of a coordinated global effort by IEA members. Well, that's about 5.6% of a record 400 million barrels of oil planned for strategic release by the IEA. Seoul says that it will continue to coordinate with major countries in responding to high oil prices to minimize domestic impact. The U.S., in line with the IEA global response, also announced plans to release 172 million barrels of oil from its emergency reserve. Well, despite efforts by governments to allay fears of a sustained supply crunch, oil prices remain elevated. Brent crude has breached the $100 a barrel mark as traders brace for a longer conflict and remain skeptical that oil releases could counter the supply shock. Analysts are also warning oil prices may keep rising unless shipping resumes through the vital waterway. Until that happens, emergency reserve releases may only offer temporary relief by oil markets. Well, market watchers see a prolonged Middle East conflict pushing prices well above $100. OPEC has assured markets that Saudi Arabia has ramped up supply, but Iran's Revolutionary Guard insist they will not allow a liter of oil through the key waterway, warning that the world should expect a $200 price tag on oil.
که نخواهید توانست قیمت نفت و انرژی را با تنفس مصنوعی پایین بیاورید که با گسترش جنگ در منطقه اعلام کردیم منتظر بشکه‌ای $200 باشید چون قیمت نفت تابع امنیت در منطقه است که منشأ ناامنی شما هستید.
Ollie Barrett, tracking the story for CNA, and he joins us live from Erbil, Iraq. Ollie, any more attacks expected? And also, are there any measures being taken to allow energy shipping to resume?
I tell you, certainly shipping firms and the industry is prepared for the possibility of further attacks. And in the short term, of course, when those attacks take place, there are rescue operations to be mounted. We saw those 2 tankers close to Qasr in Iraq, near the city of Basra, which were attacked earlier. And that led to Iraqi authorities describing their deep regret at that situation. They were saying, and have been saying, that the oil terminals are currently shut as a result. Commercial ports for now remain open. There is the possibility, to a limited extent, for some ships and shipping firms to reroute as best they can. There's the alternative pipeline route of getting oil to international markets from different countries, but that, again, is limited in the amount that it can do. We've seen the Americans bombing what they describe as mine-laying vessels as part of their attempts to keep the Strait of Hormuz as safe as possible. But clearly this disruption is going to last for some time. And just to update you, here in Erbil, we had a rocket attack overnight on an Italian military base on the outskirts of the city here. No casualties reported, but another example of a country that has not directly involved itself in this war, Italy, it seems, becoming a target here in Erbil. And just in the last few minutes, something has flown over my head, very noisy indeed. Don't know what it is. We'll have to find out exactly what it was, whether it was a rocket or a jet. But the airspace here remains closed as a result of all of this disruption.
Oh, do stay safe. Thanks very much for that report, Ollie Barrett, for CNA Erbil, Iraq. Meantime, Saudi Arabia is rushing to redirect its flow of oil through its Red Sea coast as Iranian strikes on vessels and infrastructure near the Strait of Hormuz forces shipping to slow to a trickle in the Persian Gulf. Now, a Financial Times report says around 30 supertankers are heading to the port of Yanbu, which normally sees around 2 such vessels a month. Each so-called very large crude carrier have a capacity of more than 2 million barrels of oil. Saudi Arabia exports the vast majority of its 7 million barrels a day through its east coast via the Persian Gulf. But state oil major Aramco said that it plans to redirect around 5 million barrels via its 1,200-kilometer-long pipeline to the Red Sea port. Brokers say the bulk of the ships headed to the port of Yanbu are fulfilling contracts with China and a few to South Korea and India. However, there are risks for ships going through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Yemen's Houthi militants attacked vessels passing through that waterway from the end of 2023 to last November, with the group calling it revenge for Israel's war in Gaza. Now, those attacks stopped after a ceasefire was signed last October. The Iranian-backed Houthis are keeping out of the current conflict, but their leader warns that their hands are, quote, on the trigger and ready to engage, depending on developments. Well, analysts say Iranian missiles remain the biggest threat, with the Red Sea still in the crosshairs, as some ballistic missiles are capable of reaching up to 2,000 kilometers. Now, China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, have wrapped up its week-long session at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. Some 3,000 delegates voted on a series of resolutions covering the economy, the environment, and national development. Well, we've got Tan Sihui joining us live now from Beijing for the very latest. So, Sihui, walk us through the key takeaways from the meetings and also what they signal about China's economic direction.
Well, it has been quite a week here in Beijing with the 2 sessions over the last week. One of the key headlines, GDP growth target of between 4.5 and 5%. This is the lowest in decades. Chinese leaders wanting to prioritize sustainable growth as well as leave room for structural reform. We've also seen that the Chinese leadership, they want to focus on increasing technological self-reliance. And just as the National People's Congress has just closed, lawmakers had voted for the outline of the 15th five-year plan, and that is a roadmap, an economic blueprint for the next 5 years. Some of the main strategies right there, we saw high-quality development with new growth drivers such as embodied AI and 6G technology as some of the priorities. Also, another priority is to expand domestic consumption with the services sector a new focus. And all of this comes amid evolving developments both at home and abroad, according to Chinese Premier Li Qiang. Of course, this entire news bulletin has been talking about the Middle East conflict. It has also been looming in the two sessions, throughout the two sessions, and throughout all the press conferences. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi saying that the Middle East conflict should never have happened. And he said that China is happy to and hopeful of resolving this conflict. It wants to become a mediator. And so China can be seen as a sort of a stabilizing force amid all of this crisis that is happening. The U.S.-China relations also front and center at these two sessions. Chinese Premier Li Qiang explicitly stating that the global tariffs by the U.S. has made a lot of impact on the Chinese economy. And so these were some of the key headlines at these two sessions. Enough from me, because you'll be hearing a lot more from my colleagues as well as myself later on in the program.
Tan Si-hui in Beijing, thanks for that report. Well, time now for a quick break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea's parliament clears the way for $350 billion in American investments, easing tariff tensions with Washington. Plus, a sweeping crackdown on an alleged insider trading and bribery scheme that's rocked Hong Kong's booming IPO market. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. Rola Lim joins us now with the very latest in business news. And of course, we have to talk about oil prices rising past the $100 mark today. Essentially, that's sending Asian markets lower.
Yeah, investors are rattled again on news that 3 more vessels were hit in the Gulf, and the International Energy Agency warning that global crude supplies expected to hit their lowest level in 4 years. Asian currencies and stocks erasing a 2-day rebound as another surge in oil prices due to the escalating Mideast tension, stoking fears of inflation and sending investors scrambling back to the safety of the dollar. Let's check in on the markets. Nikkei 225 ending the day 1% lower. In Seoul, the Kospi index 0.5% and the Taiwan weighted index down 1.56. Chipmakers in South Korea and Taiwan pulling both the Kospi and TAIEX down. Investor sentiment in China also waning amid signs that the war in the Middle East will not end anytime soon. The Shanghai Composite ended slightly lower, 4,129 points. Second bourse, the Shenzhen component down by 0.6%. And worse off, the Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong, it's down by 0.7%. Speaking of Hong Kong, its financial watchdogs have arrested 8 people in a sweeping crackdown in an alleged insider dealing and corruption scheme. Authorities describing it as one of the city's biggest enforcement actions in years. Now, while officials did not name the firms, sources say the local offices of CITIC Securities and Guotai Jinan International were raided, alongside the investment firm Infini Capital Management. Investigators allege brokerage executives took bribes to leak confidential details on share placement in several Hong Kong-listed companies. Now, the hedge fund allegedly used the tips to build short positions, making about $40 million in illicit profits. Authorities searched 14 locations over 2 days, including offices and private homes. The operation is the largest since 2017 and signals tougher oversight in the Asian financial hub, which was the world's top IPO market in 2025 and is seeing a record start to the year. Investigations are still ongoing. Hong Kong listed shares of Guotai Jinan dropping 4.65% today, and CITIC Securities also closing 1.7% in the red. The U.S. has opened investigations into 16 key trading partners over concerns about unfair trade practices as part of the Trump administration's renewed efforts to reinstate wide-ranging tariffs struck down by the Supreme Court last month. China, Japan, India, the EU, Korea, and Singapore are among economies to be investigated. Now, all trading partners were informed before the probe was launched. Taiwan has confirmed this. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer said the probes will be conducted under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. The law allows the U.S. to impose tariffs or other retaliatory measures on countries found to have engaged in unfair trade practices. The Trump administration says the trade surpluses that most of the listed economies have with the U.S. could point to excess capacity and overproduction. Mr. Greer said the move could also be expanded to more nations. He added the probes are independent of recent trade deals signed by the economies. China says the U.S. is using the probes as a pretext for political manipulation. And South Korea says it'll work to ensure that its exporters are not disadvantaged compared with other major economies. Japan says it is reviewing details of Section 301 probe, but will continue implementing its existing trade agreement with Washington. Meantime, South Korea's parliament has passed a major bill paving the way for $350 billion in U.S. investments under the deal struck with Washington last year, easing the threat of 25% tariffs. The move comes as new U.S. probes potentially opens the door to additional levies. The law enacts a trade deal signed in November under which Seoul pledged $200 billion in strategic U.S. industries and $150 billion in shipbuilding cooperation in exchange for more favorable tariffs. An initial $1.35 billion will fund a new state-run body to manage a dedicated U.S. investment vehicle, financed mainly by returns on foreign exchange reserves. Two committees under the Trade and Finance Ministries will oversee reviews and final approvals. And this also comes ahead of Prime Minister Kim's visit to the U.S., where he's expected to discuss bilateral tariffs further. The turmoil in the Middle East has sent oil prices spiking. Various airlines have already raised prices, and flying looks set to become more costlier in the coming months. But what if we turn to an alternative that would make us less susceptible to fluctuations in oil prices?
From kitchen to airport, the cooking oil used in your favorite deep-fried dish could potentially power your next flight. This is sustainable aviation fuel, better known as SAF, a renewable jet fuel that is made from non-petroleum sources. There are no fancy ingredients here.
There is what we need is, of course, very big amount of feedstock.
Feedstock is basically unwanted waste or residue from different production and manufacturing processes. Ecoceres is a Hong Kong-based company that makes biofuels. The animal fat you see on this barrel is just one type of feedstock used.
And feedstock we are sourcing from, of course, Malaysia, Southeast Asia, then China. And we have a different kind of feedstock. It's not only the used cooking oil, it's used cooking oil, it's palm oil effluent waste. There is a brown grease, there is a food waste, there is a fish fat, there is a animal fat, and more to come,
Using SAFs can reduce up to 80% of carbon dioxide emissions. A valuable reduction, given that analysts project carbon dioxide emissions from the aviation sector to more than double by 2050.
The carbon emission that is emitted from the engine would account for more than 95% of the overall airport's emission. That is why it's very important for airports to actually facilitate the SAF use at their airport and the engine, because SAF is the main focus or the main solution for now, at least for this decade, to ensure that the carbon emission from the engine is as low as possible.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is pushing for net zero emissions by 2050 in order to keep global warming under control. And SAFs have evolved to that end.
It's all started out in the more advanced stage or region, Europe and US. But in Asia Pacific, we have the more advanced ones in Singapore, Japan, and Malaysia. So that it's all usually started out the individual state pledge and all start making mandates.
The mandate is a legal obligation specifying the amount of renewables as a percentage of total jet fuel consumption. China is the world's second largest civil aerospace and aviation services market after the US. But as a latecomer to the renewable energy sector, it has yet to implement a SAF blending mandate. However, the country is now accelerating its efforts. The government has recently, for the first time, announced the establishment of a national low-carbon transformation fund that could see it prioritize investments in the hydrogen energy and green fuel sectors. To be sure, SAFs can be 3 to 5 times more expensive than conventional jet fuels, but industry insiders are still seeing takers.
It's a mandate-driven, but you have always, the voluntary. And let's say example, and it's because it's not any secret. So, for example, DHL, their target is to use 30% sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel. So they have put that in the target. There's also other cargo companies are doing the same. Even the Chinese cargo companies are also doing that because they have a big clients, Amazon and other, and they want also to reduce, and the end users want to reduce. So it's a twofold. You need to have also the mandates, the good push from the government policies, but then you have this voluntary market.
The aviation industry is expected to take off in the next 5 years at an annual rate of around 7%. Growth will be fastest here in the Asia Pacific. And the unwanted, often overlooked waste that most people may not pay attention to could play a key role in ensuring flying remains sustainable.
And that is the latest in business. Oteli.
Thanks, Roland. Coming up on East Asia tonight, from AI to humanoid robots, Beijing is betting big on innovation. Our correspondents in Beijing are joining us live to break down China's next growth engine. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Intensifying attacks hit merchant ships in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz as the war on Iran rages. China moving to curb the spillover effects, reportedly banning refined fuel exports this month to protect domestic supplies. And crude surges past $100 a barrel, sending stocks sharply lower. A massive release of emergency oil reserves failing to calm supply fears. And China's top legislature wraps up its annual meeting in Beijing, endorsing the government's plans for the year ahead. And to help unpack the key signals in Beijing's most important annual political meetings, CNA's senior China editor Olivia Xiong and our team in Beijing join us live.
That's right. China wants its next growth engine to look like this: artificial intelligence, humanoids, future industries. But there is a challenge. Growth is slowing. Its GDP growth target for this year, set at 4.5 to 5%, is lowest in decades, all amid global uncertainty and lingering challenges at home. So the question, can innovation support the weight of the world's second largest economy? At the start of China's annual parliamentary meetings, Chinese Premier Li Qiang acknowledged the achievements that China has made, but also the challenges ahead.
国内经济发展和转型中面临的老问题、新挑战仍然不少，新旧动能转换任务艰巨，政府工作存在不足，一些政策实施效果仍待提高。
I'm Olivia Xiong here in Beijing with a deep dive into this year's 2 sessions on East Asia Tonight. This is also a special episode of the CNA Correspondent podcast. With me are correspondents Deborah Wong and Rebecca Mateo. They've been working hard on the ground, so let's jump right into it. This year, in the new 5-year plan that's been approved, we've seen AI mentioned more than 50 times. That's up from 11 in the previous document 5 years ago. So was there a moment this week that made you go, whoa, this tech push, it's really happening? Deb?
I think for me, the fact that I've been seeing reporters donning exoskeleton suits to stabilize their shots, and some of them even had prosthetic robotic arms perched on their shoulder to hold this Insta360 camera. Not too sure whether it's just a publicity stunt or whether it really helped, because the guy did take some time to fix the robot hand to get it to work. But at the same time, I also did see at the Guangdong provincial meeting, there was a tech showcase. They were showcasing an AI translation glass, VR headsets as well. You know, whether or not they're all really useful, we don't know. But the fact that it's all around us, it's sparking interest.
Rebecca, how about you?
Well, a phrase that's been trending online is yang long xia, which quite literally translates into raising a lobster. Now, a lot of influencers have been uploading tutorials talking about what it is and how to use it. Now, a big hint here for both of you is how to use it. So do you both know what it is?
As long as it can clear my emails.
I heard about one-person companies. I think that's generating some buzz.
So you're quite right. It's a new AI tool. It's called OpenClaw. So what it does is, as Deborah pointed out, is it can help you organize your emails, schedule a meeting, edit files. So it's really like your personal assistant. Now, Chinese tech company Tencent a few days ago helped people set it up, and we saw long queues in Shenzhen, and among them were children, seniors, and retirees. And in Beijing here, just yesterday, Baidu did the same things. So this tech companies are really helping users to plug into the big system so that this software can be used across multiple platforms and apps. So it's really a combination of a big push from the government, this big tech companies stepping in and stepping up, and all this social buzz around tech and AI here in China that really makes adoption a lot faster here.
And things are really moving very fast all across China. I want to zoom into Hangzhou in China's south, which is fast becoming a robotics powerhouse. Our colleagues, senior correspondent Tan Yu-Guan, is there now, and he files this report for us.
I'm wrapping up China's 2 sessions from Hangzhou because policies set in Beijing don't simply exist on paper. They have to work in the real world and be tested in places like these. Hangzhou is one of China's 10 richest cities, home to 12 million people. But it isn't just big. It's where China's next industries are clustering, including the darling of the moment, Unitree, the company behind those kung fu robots that lit up the Spring Festival Gala. This is an example of embodied intelligence, the integration of AI into physical form. And in Beijing, the direction is now explicit. Embodied intelligence has been singled out as an industry of the future. More than half of the robots being installed anywhere in the world are in China. It's been the world's largest market for industrial robots since 2013. In his government work report, Chinese Premier Li Qiang pointed to the momentum. Industrial robot output up 28% last year. And this ambition goes further in the planning documents. Embodied intelligence moving from controlled demos into real life.
这个也是我们最终希望机器人能去达到的一个状态，成为我们生活上的一个好帮手的。
And this will be the hard part, taking robots beyond carefully staged choreography to practical applications in our daily lives.
Rebecca, those Unitree robots certainly very impressive and got everyone talking here in China. But this is a big sector. You've been digging into it a little bit, speaking to some of the smaller players. What are they saying?
Right, so Olivia, to just give you a sense of how big this market is really getting, we are in China here, there are over 6,200 AI companies right now. And I was quite curious about how the smaller companies are doing in this increasingly competitive market, right? So I spoke to a Wuhan-based robots rental company that saw orders doubling just in the recent weeks and months. And it is among the companies benefiting from all this hype around AI and tech here in China. I spoke to the CEO. What's interesting is that he's not just renting out these robots to enterprises. He's actually focusing a lot on the development of the software that's powering these robots. And he calls them the brains of these robots that help them to, eventually the robots will be able to interact with people, the environment, and they can even perform tasks like, for example, patrolling, and they can help you organize your files, sorting, printing, all things like that. And he, as a smaller company, is really focusing a lot on the tech, and his resources are channeled to tech development, software development. That's because he doesn't see the need to pour money into making the robots just yet. So it's really quite clear that even for the smaller companies, they are intending to competing for a stake in this booming market?
Yeah, Deb, the Government Work Report this year made the first mention of a smart economy. And you live in Shenzhen, which is a tech hub. When you talk to companies there, do they look at it more as an experiment or actual adoption?
Let's first break down what exactly a smart economy means. It means integrating tech and AI into the real economy. And Guangdong province, where Shenzhen city is based, is the real economy here is manufacturing, right? And the most visible transformation that we've seen really is the rise of dark factories. And that essentially means robots taking over the entire assembly line, which means it can also run 24/7. And that increases productivity.
They don't have to rest.
They don't have to rest, exactly. And then we're also seeing some companies engage humanoid robots for logistics, for just to lift heavy items as well. But when I speak to some manufacturers, not everyone is going to buy into the idea because tech costs money. And so that's where government policy comes into place. They are handing out incentives, tax exemptions also. And we heard from the man himself, He Xiaopeng. He is the CEO of XPeng, a very big EV company in China. And he was a delegate at the 2 sessions. So let's have a listen.
在自动驾驶领域呢，广州也是开放了全国最长的测试道路。首先把示范道路落到了市中心，那么可以让自动驾驶技术在真实的场景全域的迭代，并且进入 robotize 和全球化的行为相呼应。
But Rebecca, that's industrial. What about the consumer market?
Well, as Deborah has mentioned, right, the industry, I think it's largely ready, but consumers like you and I, maybe not quite there yet. Because, the new wave of humanoids and robots, they're really advanced, and I don't think people see the need to have them in their lives. Like, we don't need a caregiver robot at home right now, for example, right? But what matters is really the technology behind the humanoids and robots. And this was also a point brought up by the policymakers at 2 sessions, in that the technology has matured and they can think about the possibilities behind them to be deployed across various industry scenarios, like in manufacturing, factories, certain workplaces, and even homes. So I went onto the streets to talk to some people just to find out how they've been using tech in their lives. Let's have a listen.
一些穿戴上面，外骨骼机器人，还有一些比如说当一些服务员，可以帮助一些失能的老人，来做什么事情。
就是普通老百姓可能还是承受不了的，承受不起。 所以，一般的老百姓可能还没想到，将来以后我得买个机器人帮我打理家务什么的。
Deborah, tech moves fast here, but there are also the regulations. Things like who owns AI-generated content, privacy issues. That's an issue here as well.
Absolutely. Rebecca talked about OpenClaw in the chat earlier. But as fast as that hype was building, people are also now promoting uninstallation services here in China because users are talking about security risk, data privacy risk. And so then that echoes the whole sentiment here. China wants to balance innovation with regulation. And we saw that built into the new 5-year plan, where they're talking about strengthening AI governance frameworks and data protection, and also oversight, having stronger oversight over algorithms. And that's important because China wants to be a world leader in AI.
The AI race certainly moving forward on many, many fronts. Thank you both for those on-the-ground insights. But coming up, if tech is the future, what happens to people and livelihoods? After the break, I'll speak to our other correspondents, Tan Si-hui and Crystal Chia.
China's annual parliamentary session has wrapped up in Beijing. Nearly 3,000 delegates at the National People's Congress voted on key policies covering the economy, the environment, and national development. Well, for more on what these decisions mean for China's future direction and its people, let's go back to CNA senior China editor Olivia Xiong and our team in Beijing.
Well, this is a special episode of East Asia Tonight and the CNA Correspondent podcast. Earlier on in our discussion, we spoke about China's big bet on AI and future industries. But if machines are getting smarter, where does that leave people? In China's latest 5-year plan, 7 out of the 20 main targets focused on people's livelihoods. There was also this pledge by China's Human Resources Minister Wang Xiaoping at one of the news conferences.
我们也在研究相关政策，积极发挥人工智能在创造新岗位和赋能传统岗位方面的作用。
I'm joined now by CNA's correspondents Tan Su-hui and Crystal Chia. Let's get into this part of the discussion. Life expectancy is expected to go up, but birth rates last year at a record low. So we know that the workforce is shrinking. There's AI and robots to help, but so much of China's economy has been powered by its sheer size of its population. So what are people saying about, even as the government tries to get people to have more children, how are people responding to that?
So the government now faces the task of both expanding support in the elder care sector as well as creating what it calls a birth-friendly society. Now, you asked about how people are responding to it. Beyond the official press conferences, if you look online, there's been a lot of discussion around some of the suggestions by various delegates surrounding flexi work, childcare subsidies. One interesting discussion is about something that's quite cultural specific. This is about dowry. So this is the gift that the groom's family has to give the bride's family in order to get married. And this varies from province to province, but it can be as high as 300,000 Chinese yuan, which is about $40,000. So one delegate proposed that this be kept at 60,000 yuan in order to encourage more people to get married and have children.
Su-hui?
Well, I think these childcare subsidies, they help to alleviate some of the pressures. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of the people I spoke with, they say it's not enough. And I have a neighbor who plays her kids play the piano every night, and I could hear it.
Very diligent.
Yeah, so Chinese people are very diligent. They practice every day. I talked to them, I asked about the private piano classes, and they say that it costs 1,000 yuan for each private lesson. That's about 200 USD. And then she has a second child. And so cost of living, very high. And so the nationwide childcare subsidy program, it was introduced last year. 300 yuan per child below the age of 3. That's about 50 USD. When you have a child below the age of 3, diapers, milk powder, that's going to wipe out that amount. It's not going to be enough. And I think one of the root problems that, in terms of childbearing, I think young people here in China are just not marrying. And so it goes back to the domestic economy, this low confidence in terms of unemployment fears, low wages. So it all boils down to that again.
There's another pressure that we've been watching as well. China is going to have a record number of 12.7 million graduates this year. But youth unemployment is an issue. And then you're hearing about AI, automation, smart factories. How are young people feeling about their future, Crystal?
So you mentioned youth unemployment, and that's been around 15% for the past 6 months. A lot of them, including university graduates, they are turning to gig work. So this means flexible work, being flexible workers without full-time labor contracts. And there are about 200 million of them in China at the moment, right? And if you look at even those in school, there's that question about how the labor market will look like when they graduate. At the 2 sessions, there was a delegate representing the Communication University of China. That's the top in its field. And it said that the delegate said that the school had axed 16 courses because of AI. Now, earlier this week, I was on the streets of Beijing. I wanted to find out from young people, ordinary people, how they feel about this topic. And it seems like some of them are still staying resilient to the changes. They are optimistic. I spoke to Mr. Mo, who is a humanities and social sciences master's student studying in Beijing, and this is what he has to say.
就像几百年前纺织工突然被纺织机器替代了一样，大家都会自发的恐惧。 但是它不能代替我们思考，因为我是做人文社科方面相关的专业嘛，所以我觉得它可以帮我处理一些翻译文本或者 大纲的构思的问题，但是并不能替代我的思考。
But Crystal, for many years, property has been this major security blanket for Chinese, but we know that it continues to be a drag on the economy. But it didn't really feature much at this year's 2 sessions. Map it out for us.
Yeah, so I was at the livelihoods presser. It's not a must that the housing ministry must be there, but the minister was there for the past 2 years, and this year he wasn't there. In the government work report, it was also, the officials mainly just reiterated what we already know, such as the pledge to stabilize the property sector and to use city-specific policies to control supply. Now, all this is a reflection that the government is not inclined to announce sweeping stimulus measures right now. And if we look into 2026, there's more pain to come, probably with lower sales, falling prices, and developers continuing to struggle.
So, I'm getting flashbacks to last week when we sat through
that 2.5-hour-long marathon press conference
on economic issues. And instead of property, which used to make up about 25% of China's GDP at its peak, a lot of focus was instead on domestic consumption. But that's all linked together. And there are challenges in getting people to spend, even though there are proposals like, extra holidays in the spring and the autumn break, giving more support for consumer credit. Why aren't people spending?
Well, that is a good question, but we need to go back to the savings rate. Let me tell you, the Chinese average household, there's excess household savings from 2020 to 2025. There's an excess household savings of 580 billion USD. So the Chinese people are saving a lot, and they're seen as precautionary savings because of unemployment fears. And also, there's also a lot of debt, household debt, and that really is linked to mortgage loans and also linked to the current struggling property sector. And so consumption rate by Chinese, it stands at 40% of the GDP, and that is way lower than the OECD average of 54%. Whether domestic consumption would increase, experts are saying that this would take quite a while, in fact, 10 years.
And to make things even more complicated, we're talking about new growth drivers like consumption and technology, but the world is becoming more unpredictable as well. And China instead is positioning itself as a stable power compared to the US and what we see happening in the Middle East. Also making a call for foreign firms to invest in China. And there was this very interesting analogy by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Commerce Minister Wang Wentao. Let's have a listen first.
我们乐见欧洲的朋友们走出保护主义的小阁楼，来到中国市场的健身房。
很多外资企业到中国来就像健身房一样，健身强体，跟我们企业这个共同的、平等的、公平的竞争。
Foreign direct investment, we know, fell by 9.5% last year. So, jumping off that analogy, how keen would foreign firms be to get a Chinese gym membership?
I mean, you go to the gym quite a bit, right? So what do you look out for? You want to look out for promotional packages, you're looking for services. Exactly, good facilities. And so this is the plan now for China. What they're looking for, the new 5-year plan, they want to improve services and support for foreign investors. And this really ties in with their big push for driving domestic consumption, increase consumption through the services sector. They're trying to increase a range of experiences like the cruise sector, elder care, even increasing sports events. And when you want people to spend in China, invest in China, as well as export through China, you want to increase access to China. And so we can see that a lot in the visa-free access that China is really pushing. I went to Chongqing, a lot of visa-free access over there as well. But at the same time, experts are saying that there are a lot of challenges. Well, the key challenge is that there's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty at the moment. We see that in the Middle East conflict. Also, another challenge for foreign direct investment is that there's increasingly high domestic competition at the moment. So lots going on at the moment.
So a lot of foreign firms waiting and watching what's going to happen. But another interesting point that some from the business community pointed out is that while we are seeing investment in certain sectors like property go down, it's actually going up in some of the hot sectors like tech, like the silver economy. So it's a bit of a very nuanced picture when it comes to foreign direct investment, even though the overall picture is like that. Well, we've spoken a lot, and it's been a very busy week covering a whole range of topics. So let's help, put things into perspective here. Moving forward, what is one thing that you will be watching in the year ahead? Crystal?
I will be watching for changing attitudes, right, by the Chinese towards maybe consumption, marriage, childbearing, finding a job, and above all, whether they feel confident about the future.
As for me, I'm keeping a close eye on Mr. Trump because whatever moves that the world's largest economy makes will definitely affect the world's second largest economy.
And he could be visiting China in just a few weeks.
That's right.
And you'll be busy.
You too.
But I think another thing to point out, next year it's going to be an important year for China. It's going to be, the Chinese Communist Party is going to have its party congress, and we'll be looking out for that 5-yearly leadership reshuffle and what's going to happen there. But thank you so much, both of you, for your insights and for joining us here today. Much to watch as China enters its next chapter of economic growth. And this was a special edition of East Asia Tonight and the CNA Correspondent Podcast. Thanks for watching and listening. Ateli.
Oh, great dynamic, in-depth discussion there in our Beijing bureau. Really enjoyed that. Thank you so much, Olivia Seong and team, for breaking it all down for us. Passenger train services between China and North Korea have resumed after a 6-year suspension triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Yonhap news agency say that the K27 train, marking the first direct passenger service between the two countries since 2020, has crossed the border. The journey takes 24 hours and 41 minutes, traveling via the port city of Tianjin and the northeastern border city of Dandong, before arriving in the North Korean capital of Pyongyang on Friday evening. China Railway says that the Beijing-Pyongyang service will run in both directions 4 times a week. And a separate Dandong-Pyongyang route will operate daily. Tickets for the first departure have sold out, but those for 18th of March are said to be available. Chinese state media reports that the service resumption will facilitate people-to-people exchanges, trade and cultural cooperation. And I hope you've enjoyed Thursday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can also find us on all our socials, including Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.